The BBC has been criticised for screening a new documentary about Chris Kaba 2 weeks after the officer who shot him dead in 2022 was rightly cleared of that ridiculous murder charge and had a £10,000 bounty put on his head. This is our state broadcaster yet again making a documentary that is blatantly in the favour of a criminal and a man who killed and was part of a gang and a drug network. And this poor bugger who was doing his job will be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. And our state broadcaster, Brendan, hasn't got the balls, or basically has the ideology in its head that it can carry on like this. I think they're a disgrace, the BBC, mate. I really do.
I think it's outrageous, actually. There is, you know, the public broadcaster, which we are all compelled by law to fund,
absolutely,
is essentially taking the side of the criminal in this situation. We know that Chris Kaba had a criminal background, and we know that, you know, the thing that worries me about this case is the message it sends to firearms officers. These people do a really difficult job. There is huge pressure on them to make the right decision every single second of every single day. Most of the times they do, sometimes they won't. We all accept that. But they are the people who keep us safe. They are the people who, when push comes to shove and there might be a terrorist threat or a criminal threat, they might have to take extreme action to protect the populace. They have now been told by everyone from members of the political establishment right through to the BBC that if you do anything wrong, or if we think you do anything wrong, we will hound you and hunt you and embarrass you. And that is going to strike fear into the people.
Why would anybody want to take a job that's probably not very well paid to try and protect a country and its citizens who somehow have put people in power who are going to make that an impossible job? Here's what I don't understand legally. You will better than me. So the jury weren't told that this Chris Kaba was somebody who was part of this notorious gang who'd been in trouble with. They were not allowed to know that, but we're allowed, of course, to put a policeman who's doing his job on trial. Utterly, utterly disgraceful. I believe, and this is why I'd like a Trump in this country, the BBC should be bloody well censured by the government. Of course they won't be, because we live in a nanny state now where you can't do anything, and don't get me on that. I think our government is anti-British. Let me move on to one other thing very quickly, if I can, my friend. Starmer screwed the pensioners, screwed the farmers. Well, I was on holiday, screwed all of us with £41 billion worth of tax. Yesterday or today has announced he's going to screw students as well with a rise in tuition fees, something he said he'd never do when he stood for leader. What are this lot like? They're just anti-British, aren't they, pal?
They are breaking all of their promises. Yeah. You know, Starmer is a pathological breaker of his manifesto promises and his leadership promises. When he went to become leader of the Labour Party, he expressly said he would not raise tuition fees. We've all seen Rachel Reeves say that they wouldn't raise income tax, they wouldn't raise national insurance, and they've done both of those things. They hoodwinked their way into Downing Street. No, I was going to ask you this, actually. I was to write this down so too. I think it's worse than that. I think the British public was so hacked off with the Tories, I think that could have stood with a Labour badge and won. They didn't have to say anything, Brendan. There were no policies, there was no substance, there was a few things. And I was screaming at the British side of the British people, they're going to do us, they're going to absolutely do us, but there was no way out of that, right? Well, it's like what you said earlier. It's not so much that Labour won the election as the Tories lost it, and they lost it catastrophically. And I think they deserve to. They've not been very good for the past few years. So there wasn't any enthusiasm for Labour, but I still think there were probably some Labour voters. I wasn't one of them, as it happens, but there were probably some Labour voters who thought that Labour would do what they said they would do. So I think it's a combination of those two things, where firstly, Labour just got in by default because the country was so ticked off with the Tories, but also to the extent that Labour did get in on any level of enthusiasm, it turned out that all that stuff was nonsense. It was myths. They lied. So I think this government, who said that they would return the adults to the room and bring sense and normalcy back to the country, they've actually made this country far more corrupt and scandalous than it was under the Tories.
Who the hell could have believed that in 14 short weeks we could be a laughingstock? Just to finish, ticked off with the Tories. In the last 24 hours, Kemi Badenoch, the new Tory leader, has appointed a top team. Chris Philp, Home Secretary, Dame Priti Patel, Mel Stride, the big beast are at the back. Some will say getting ready to retire. Others, like me, will believe that James Cleverly's on manoeuvres and waiting for it all to go wrong. Can somebody like Kemi Badenoch turn the Tories round? Is reform's momentum too great, or do you see it as the start of something OK about the Tories?
You know, I've got a lot of time for Kemi Badenoch. I think she's a very sensible person. She's very articulate. She's quite brave. She stood up to the gender ideologues. She doesn't believe that Britain is a rotten, institutionally racist country. She says it's a good place to be a black person. She also believes in freedom of speech. She supported Brexit. She opposed the attempts to overthrow Brexit. So she's got a lot to recommend her. She's not afraid to fight the culture war. And that was one of the problems with the Tories. Yeah. Boris promised in 2019 that he would take on the woke, but he never really did. I think Kemi Badenoch is more likely to do that, which will be a good thing. But will she do it firmly enough? Or will the cabinet drag her back? That's what remains to be seen.
I mean, that's the point about the cabinet. We talk about finding balance, bringing Priti Patel back, the Dame Priti Patel, Mel Stride, more a centrist, more a one-nation Tory. But if you look back to, well, Maastricht in 1997, whoever has led the Tory party for the last nearly 30 years has had to try and balance the Cameron centrists with the right wing. That's where I think Jenrick went wrong. I'm not having a go at Robert Jenrick, but if you go too far to the right to get reform back, you're going to use your core base. But how do you do that? What the Tory party needs, and I don't know if she's the person, is somebody like Thatcher to say, listen, this is a crock of rubbish, right? And I'm going to absolutely, from top to bottom, I'm going to change this. And if you don't like it, I'll sack you. I'm sure in 10 years I'll have sacked you all and you'll get rid of me. But that's, you know, I need a vision. They need a vision. They need somebody with a plan that they stick with, or that person is strong enough, as you said, to stick to their morals, right?
Absolutely. What they need to do is to give us a good economic plan that will not hurt people's bank balances or pockets like Labour is doing.
Yeah.
And also, even more importantly than that, they need to give us a sense of cultural pride. They need to remind us that this is a great country. They need to get immigration under control, which is what people want them to do. They need to tackle the woke insanity, and they need to restore a bit of self-respect to the nation. If they can do those two things, the economy and culture, they'll be onto a winner.
Brendan, it's always great to have you on. Thank you so much indeed. Brendan O'Neill from Spiked. We love him.